Thank you all for coming this evening and for joining us for this, what will be a very interesting lecture by Dr. Carole Pollard. It's wonderful to have you all here for our final talk in our monthly series in the Oak Room. And we'd like to start by extending our huge thanks to all of our speakers and audiences who have supported the series thus far. And the goal of the series has always been to bring diverse voices to the forefront, to offer fresh perspectives on stories we think we know, and to shine a light on those that have yet to be told. We're also aimed to highlight existing and new research and publications that deepen our understanding of Dublin's built and cultural heritage. The series is made possible by part funding from the Heritage Council's County Heritage Plan grant scheme, and we're very grateful for their support in helping to bring these important conversations to life. We look forward to developing another series in 2025, and we'll be in touch with you when that programme is organised. So I'd like to take a moment just to express a few thanks, if you don't mind, to people who've made this evening possible. Firstly, a huge thanks to my colleague Abigail O'Reilly, who's Graduate Heritage Officer, for all of her hard work in organising this series. We couldn't have done it without her in reality, so we're very grateful. I'd also like to thank Cormac Leonard and Sarah Garvey, who are providing Irish Sign Language interpretation for us tonight, and who have been doing so for the last number of months. Their contribution ensures that we're all able to engage fully in tonight's event. I'd also like to thank the Lord Mayor, Councillor James Gagan, and the fantastic staff of the Mansion House for so graciously hosting us this evening. It's a really wonderful venue to host a lecture series about Dublin. Now, before introducing Carole, I would also like to just let you know that we're being joined this evening by Sunniva O'Flynn, Head of Irish Film Programming in the Irish Film Institute. Sunniva has very kindly agreed to introduce the screening of an extract of a film called Alive, Alive-O. Doesn't sound very promising, but it is interesting, which is a short commemorative film or propaganda piece. It's up to you to decide later on, and Sunniva will go into greater detail about that afterwards. That was commissioned by Irish Life on the completion of the Irish Life Centre. And so we hope you can stay, but if you can't, that's absolutely fine as well. The screening will be about 16 minutes. Okay. We've taken out all of the extraneous kind of dodgy history stuff that's at the start of it, so you don't have to listen through that. And I know that certain people in the audience would be really horrified at some of the so-called history that's included in that film. So now to introduce our speaker, Dr. Carole Pollard. Carole is an architect, probably known to most of you, an architectural historian and writer with a special interest in 20th century Irish architecture. She's a fellow and past president of the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland. Carole was a member of the research team on the Dublin City's 20th century architecture research project, which culminated in the 3-volume series More Than Concrete Blocks. The volume 1 was 2016, volume 2 was published in 2019, and volume 3 was published last November in 2023. And she was co-editor with Dr. Alan Rowley on the 3rd volume, which covers the period 1973 to 1999. The book is available through UCD Press, and of course in all good bookshops. And Carole's MA research led to the publication of Liam McCormick, 7 Donegal Churches, published in 2011. And she was contributor to North by Northwest, the life and work of Liam McCormick, edited by Shane O'Toole and Paul Larmour. Carole is published widely in both edited volumes and in journals. And Carole is currently coordinating editor for the Irish entries in the upcoming Bloomsbury Global Encyclopedia of Women in Architecture, which will be published next year. It's supposed to be done. And she was also co-editor of Irish Cities in Crisis, which was published in October, but launched last week. So congratulations on that, Carole. Her current projects include the publication of her PhD thesis, Andy Devane and the Architecture of the Modern Irish Office Block, 1963 to 1979, and the publication and dissemination of her research into 20th century Irish women architects, titled From Grey to Grafton, Ireland's Mostly Forgotten 20th Century Women Architects. So can you please join me in welcoming Carole to the podium for her talk, The Rise from Tumbledown Decay, Dublin and Devane, 1960 to 1980. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. I lost my glasses at the weekend, so these are reading glasses that I have, so I'm going to try and manage without them. But if I keep putting them on and off, I hope they won't distract you. And I'd just like to say you're all very welcome to come along this evening. It's been a while since I've written anything of any length about Andy, so it was kind of nice to go back, because me and Andy spent an awful lot of time in my showroom, in my back garden during the COVID years when I was doing my PhD. So it's been a while since I visited some of this material, so it's nice to do it again. And it's also particularly nice to see so many of the Devane family here this evening as well. Thank you. So my presentation this evening is about Dublin, specifically the Irish Life Centre and the noble ambitions of its architect, Andy Devane. This presentation tells the story of the evolution of the Irish Life Centre, which at the time of its construction was the largest single development ever undertaken in the city. However, for many reasons, which I believe are rooted in the circumstances of its genesis, the Irish Life Centre has rarely been put under the spotlight except for negative reasons. Office blocks of the 1960s and 1970s are hard things to love for many people. The popular narrative is that office blocks of those decades were ill-conceived, destructive to their locales, and poorly built. However, the story is much more complex than that. In Dublin, those office blocks tell a story that is uniquely of the city and of Ireland's 20th century evolution. The Irish Life Centre is at the centre of that 20th century story. I hope you will leave this evening feeling a little bit more affection for this Dublin landmark than you do right at this moment, and if not affection, at least a better understanding. But first, some background on its architect, Andy Devane. Andy Devane was born in Limerick City in 1917. He was tutored at home until the age of 8, until he was sent to boarding school. And from the age of 12, he attended Clongowes Wood College in County Kildare. Devane's closest friend at Clongowes was Paddy Robinson, the son and grandson of architects. Paddy's grandfather, John Loftus Robinson, was an accomplished architect and artist who founded an architectural practice which was later taken over by Paddy's father, Johnny Robinson, who built it into one of Ireland's most successful 20th century practices under the title of Robinson and Keefe. After completing their schooling, both Paddy and Andy went on to study architecture, Paddy at the AA in London and Andy at UCD. After graduation, they worked together at Robinson Keefe, while simultaneously Andy, I'll call him Devane from now on, completed a qualification in town planning. In 1943, Devane was admitted to a member of the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland, and the following year was made a partner at Robinson and Keefe at the age of only 27. However, Devane did not let the responsibilities of partnership stand in the way of travel plans that had been fermenting in his mind since his college years. The possibility of overseas travel had opened up again in 1945 after the end of the war. In early 1946, Devane said he announced his intention to travel to the United States, to the consternation of his family and of Johnny Robinson, but no opinion about it would have changed his mind. He sent applications to several renowned architects in the United States and ultimately accepted an offer from Frank Lloyd Wright. He travelled to Wright's Taliesin Fellowship in Arizona in April of 1946, also spending time at the fellowship in Wisconsin before returning to Ireland in June of 1947. While there, Devane worked on projects including the Guggenheim Museum in New York, which, although not built until 1959, was on the drawing boards at Taliesin during 1946 and 47. He also worked on a studio for radio and television personality Arch Oboler in Malibu, California, a house in the Everglades in Florida, which he visited on site with Wes Peters, who was Frank Lloyd Wright's son-in-law and right-hand man, the Florida Southern College, where he also spent time with Peters, and the 47-story Rogers Lacey Hotel in Dallas, Texas, which was never built because the client died unexpectedly. He also worked on detailed drawings for the Johnson Wax Building in Wisconsin and on the preparation of early design drawings for the mill owners building for the Sarabhai family in Ahmedabad in India. Wright's lifelong influence on Devane is a story in itself, and there's not time enough for it this evening. Suffice it to say that Wright fueled Devane's passion for architecture, a passion that would sustain him through his long and productive career. Devane considered Wright a genius, saying he can be reviled, imitated, possibly emulated, but never equalled. He also considered Wright a friend. Despite the difference in their ages and backgrounds, the two men shared a common ground. Both proclaimed to see God in all things, particularly in good architecture, and lived their lives completely immersed in their work. Many look for Wright's influence in the physical manifestation of Devane's architecture. For example, overhanging eaves, cantilevered concrete, and a horizontal emphasis. While those reference points do exist, Wright's influence is deeper and more intangible. It's in the touch and the feel, the sighting and the play of light, the materiality. It's in the way both architects make the most of the fewest resources, whether in a limited palette of materials, the frugal use of expensive elements, and in the design of generous courtyards and public spaces at the expense of tight floor-to-ceiling heights and narrow corridors. The projects Devane undertook in the years immediately after his return to Ireland resonated strongly with influences of Wright, and those influences continue to surface even in the later years of his career. Remarkably, though, each of Devane's buildings, while sharing similar values, is different in character and scale. During different phases, he used different palettes of materials. The random desert masonry at Journey's End Lodge and the textured exposed concrete at Inchicore Vocational School in the 1950s. The grey concrete brick of St Patrick's College Drumcondra, the link building at Clongoweswood College, and Our Lady Queen of Heaven, Dublin Airport in the 1960s. Or the rope rough concrete finish employed at Turlock Hill Administration Building, Wicklow, St Vincent's in Sutton, and the house he built for his son at Howth, known as The End, in the 1970s and early 80s. Always, his choice of materials was driven by site conditions, frugality, and the need to construct buildings that could withstand the Irish climate, rather than the one-size-fits-all stylistic palette of international modernism. On his return to Dublin in 1947, Devane settled back in at Robinson and Keefe, which was renamed Robinson, Keefe and Devane in recognition of his earlier appointment as partner and anticipated role in the development of the practice. Not long after, he met Maureen Ashe, a graduate of the National College of Art. They married in 1950 and had 3 sons, and made Devane's masterpiece at Howth, a house called Journey's End Lodge, their family home. Devane's early projects at Robinson, Keefe and Devane included the Meath GU unit of 1955 and Mount Carmel Hospital of 1960, and a number of buildings on the St Patrick's campus in Drumcondra. He completed a large number of educational buildings for the VEC, as well as churches and schools in Dublin and in his home city of Limerick. By the early 1960s, Devane was one of the country's foremost architects and was highly regarded within the profession. He was therefore ideally positioned to take a prominent role in the transformational development of Dublin over the next 2 decades. And so to Dublin of the early 1960s, a city of tumbledown decay, a city where poverty was rife, where housing was amongst the worst in Europe. Its Georgian legacy was mostly a tale of faded grandeur, but also a tale of desperate poverty and deprivation. Lack of investment for several decades meant that the streets were broken and poorly lit. Many buildings were dilapidated or derelict. Air pollution was unchecked, and the Liffey, as the song goes, stank like hell. But the winds of change began to blow in the early 1960s, primarily driven by new economic policies introduced by Taoiseach Sean Lemass and his financial advisor T.K. Whitaker. Dublin was on the cusp of change. A newfound optimism founded on economic growth principles enabled Ireland, and particularly Dublin, to attempt to emulate the post-war prosperity experienced across Western Europe and the United States. The structure and infrastructural changes to Dublin in the 1960s and 70s, and by that I mean not just office blocks, but housing, roads and civic improvement generally, came about because of unprecedented economic buoyancy and the availability of cheap fuel. There was money to build, and buildings could, for the first time, ignore the primary need to address the Irish climate. Central heating was cheap. Air conditioning was the height of sophistication. Materials could be imported at affordable rates. Finally, in Ireland, we could copy modern architecture idioms prevalent in the United States and continental Europe. Large spans of glass symbolised the modern and open world that Ireland was seeking to join. Precast concrete brought a new elasticity to the structural possibilities. Deep spans led to flat roofs. And unfortunately, speed of construction led to poorly executed building details, subsequently exacerbated by poor maintenance. Cheap fuel also led to the proliferation of private car use, necessitating extensive reconfiguration of the city's road network. Widespread demolition of the urban fabric was justified by the need for everybody to bring their car with them to their workplace or to the shop, and the right to park their car within easy walking distance of their desk or their new winter coat. This was the biggest building boom in Dublin since the Georgian era, some 200 years earlier, and there were many wannabe Luke Gardners and Viscount Fitzwilliams, and who was financing them? The source of money for much of the development lay with pension funds managed by the insurance companies. Of these, Irish Life Assurance Company Limited, more commonly known just as Irish Life, became Ireland's biggest property development company through the 1950s and 60s and 70s. From the 1940s, they had continuously expanded their property portfolio, purchasing large tracts of Dublin City for redevelopment. Irish Life's first offices were at Hammond Buildings on O'Connell Street, but in 1962 they moved to modern new headquarters on Mespil Road in the leafy environments of the Grand Canal. Their headquarters, designed by Downes, Meehan and Robson, was critically acclaimed and was a trendsetter in the transformation of Ballsbridge into Dublin's premier business address. In fact, Irish Life financed several high-profile developments in the Ballsbridge area. From the early 1960s, the leafy and pleasant streets of the Dublin South Side were under persistent threat of redevelopment. Even historic Stephen's Green came under pressure, particularly on the east side at Hume Street and along the north edge between Dawson Street and Kildare Street. And we see Irish Life's hand here too. During the 1940s and 50s, Irish Life brought up numbers 18 to 21, including the former St Andrews College and the gardens of the University Club. In 1963, they commissioned Andy Devane to design a new office complex for the site. Devane's Stephen Court was well received when it was completed in 1970. The Irish Times described it as discreet and distinguished, unflamboyant yet exciting. The design respected existing parapet lines and the muted materiality of its older neighbours. One of the more satisfying aspects of Devane's Stephen Court scheme is the internal courtyard garden, which can be glimpsed by passers-by. Irish Life was very happy with Devane's scheme for Stephen Court, and no doubt the good publicity it attracted on completion. Prior to his commission to design Stephen Court, Devane did not have much cause to concern himself with urban design theories. Until then, his projects were on sites that lay outside the urban realm. Even the projects he undertook in Dublin, churches, VEC schools and hospital buildings, were located in peri-urban sites with little or no urban context. However, in 1970, Devane joined a small group of architects who instigated the Dublin Urban Study with the purpose of recommending a comprehensive policy for Dublin's preservation and enhancement. The study culminated in the publication of a book called Dublin A City in Crisis, and which included an essay by Devane entitled Space About Buildings. The ideas that Devane presented in that essay were drawn from theories he had absorbed through his extensive travels and from his experience at Stephen Court. His Dublin A City in Crisis essay includes a careful analysis of existing urban ratios, building heights to streets, street to lot sizes to open spaces, and how those ratios can be reinterpreted as a modular for new development in the city. He uses Stephen Court to illustrate his ideas, particularly his belief that urban permeability is important. By that, we mean avoidance of large, impenetrable city blocks, but rather laneways and shortcuts, places to rest and enjoy nature or art installations, places to sit and talk with friends. Importantly, the ability to penetrate, to experience a building from within, and to share its hidden treasures is a generous civic act that enhances city life for everyone. Such generosity was rare amongst Dublin's new breed of property developer, and as Devane would come to know well, was difficult to sustain under pressure. Devane's essay Space About Buildings reveals his ambitions for his latest and biggest project, the Irish Life Centre, which was already under construction by the time Dublin A City in Crisis was published in 1975. In his description of his design concept for the Irish Life Centre, he says, "The street form is being maintained, enclosed and developed with buildings which are related to it in mass, scale and finish, aimed at achieving a balance. Abbey Street and Butt Bridge open into a plaza which serves as a pedestrian access to the buildings of various heights grouped around it, and the adjoining Northumberland Square. This in turn leads by arcade to Talbot Street. These spaces aim to create within themselves and as seen from the street a new utilitarian amenity for the general public." Devane underlines the fact that this is the first major scheme in Dublin to incorporate residential accommodation along with shopping, offices and residential facilities in order to enhance the experience for those who will use the centre, and because the surrounding is, in his words, dreary and noisy with traffic and trains. Devane planned to incorporate a large landscape garden with mature trees set at the heart of the complex, to provide what is hoped will be a homely and peaceful haven for the use of occupants and their friends. But let's step back a moment and look at the dreary environment that Devane was attempting to transform. The 1960s and 70s building boom in Dublin was concentrated very firmly on the south side of the city. In 1985, 20 or more years after the boom began, Frank MacDonald estimated that only 33 of the more than 300 office blocks built since 1960 were located on the north side of the city. Despite ambitious north side schemes like the critically acclaimed Bucyrus and the Abbey Theatre, both by Michael Scott and Partners, and Ireland's first skyscraper, Liberty Hall, completed in 1962, profit-driven development companies were loath to risk their dividends north of the river. O'Connell Street, Dublin's main boulevard, had been in steady decline since the 1950s, and the integrity of its architectural set piece was severely undermined by the blasting of Nelson's Pillar in 1966. Despite the physical drawbacks, the northeast quadrant of the city was an ideal location for redevelopment because it was in dire need of investment. In its favour, it was adjacent to O'Connell Street, contained the city central bus station, had easy access to the port, was served by a main railway line, and was framed at its edges by fine Georgian architecture, including Gandon's Custom House and the long Georgian avenue of Gardiner Street leading to Mountjoy Square, although much of this was in a state of decay. Because of that close proximity to poverty and decay, the northeast city centre remained uncharted territory for property developers who called it a twilight zone. Michael Lucy, the property investment manager at Irish Life, was more aware than most of the potential of Dublin's north inner city. Prior to joining Irish Life, he had worked as chief valuer for Dublin Corporation, inquiring development lands, including those earmarked for the Litchfield plan, which encompassed the Henry Street, Moore Street, Parnell Street area, and ultimately led to the development of the Ilac Centre in 1980. The catalyst for the extensive redevelopment by Irish Life of the Abbey Street, Talbot Street block was a fire in 1970 which caused extensive damage to the Brooks Thomas Builders Merchants premises and threatened neighbouring buildings. The following year, Brooks Thomas sold the site to the Irish Life. Over a period of 2 years, Irish Life assembled a site of more than 4 acres that stretched east-west from Beresford Lane to Marlborough Place and north-south from Talbot Street to Lower Abbey Street, facilitating the first phase of development, which was completed in 1978. Later acquisition of properties between Marlborough Place and Marlborough Street enabled the second phase, which was completed in 1985. Irish Life appointed Robinson, Keefe and Devane as architects for the development in December of 1971, specifically requesting that Devane lead the design team. Devane accepted the appointment, saying that he was honoured and delighted that Irish Life should place such confidence in him, particularly so because the venture was an Irish one. Soon after, in March 1972, Devane presented the first schematic drawings for a mixed-use development, including a shopping mall connecting Talbot Street to Abbey Street. The preliminary scheme included the retention of two sides of a small 19th century residential enclave called Northumberland Square. However, in the ensuing months, Devane became embroiled in a major dispute about the demise of those dwellings, and ultimately the houses at Northumberland Square were demolished. Calls from groups like the Living City Group and An Taisce to rehouse the Northumberland Square residents in the new development fell on deaf ears, even though Devane was sympathetic to their pleas. As Devane and his team were revising and reworking the schematic drawings, Lucy and his colleagues were busy increasing Irish Life's property holding, acquiring the Varian Brushes and the Educational Company properties on Talbot Street. In April 1972, they informed Devane that they would be relocating the Irish Life Assurance Company headquarters to the new development, occupying the central tallest block. This decision had a major impact on the scope and ambition of the project, particularly on the amount of money Irish Life were willing to invest in materials and finishes. The fact is that it would not have been possible to assemble a site of this scale on Dublin's south side, particularly one at such close proximity to the central O'Connell Street, Grafton Street spine. It was significant that as far as Irish Life were concerned, all the properties they bought were expendable. They held little architectural or heritage value and were certainly not incompatible with the scale and spirit of modern commercial development envisioned to rise in their place. Indeed, the project's planning consultant described the entire site as an area of obsolescence. What was not considered by Irish Life or by their advisors was that the Abbey Street, Talbot Street block contained the layers of more than 300 years of habitation, a centuries-old weave of laneways, houses, and historic industrial infrastructure. In social infrastructure terms, the demise of the artisan cottages in the lanes, the flats above the shops, and the houses in Northumberland Square resulted in the loss of a vibrant city community, while the loss of many family-owned small businesses that had sat alongside big employers like Brooks Thomas and Varians accelerated the general decline of the area and contributed to increasing levels of antisocial activity. The scale of the demolition across such a vast area resulted in the loss of human scale and diversity. In fairness to Devane, he did his utmost to atone for that loss, both through his early thwarted support of An Taisce and the Living City Group to try and save Northumberland Square, and later in his efforts to integrate public routeways and amenities into the scheme by providing a mix of residential apartment types, by placing buildings of varying heights within a network of pedestrian routes, and through the creation of a series of public spaces and gardens. Throughout the autumn of 1972, Devane attended unofficial meetings with Dublin Corporation planners, trying to negotiate some leeway over his proposals. There were three key items of concern: residential provision, height restriction, and the management of the reaction of the forthcoming public announcement by Irish Life of their plans. Devane acknowledged the corporation's nervousness at the scale of the development and their fear that any leeway granted would set a precedent for other developments in the city. The assistant city manager confirmed that the development was in a restricted height area, restricted height zone, and although the development plan did not set a maximum height, he advised the highest point should be no longer than the bus station. Devane argued forcefully in favour of his proposed central 12-storey tower, going so far as to say that Irish Life would only proceed on the basis of 12 stories being permitted. Meanwhile, he met with representatives of An Taisce, the Living City Group, and the Dublin Civic Group. After the meeting, he felt he had successfully allayed their concerns about the scale of the development and the loss of housing by focusing on the design quality of his proposal. Remember, this was the first mixed-use commercial and residential scheme proposed for Dublin. He used the leverage of his achievement at Stephen Court and his professional relationship with An Taisce's Sean Rothery, a co-author in Dublin's A City in Crisis, to give his argument weight, arguing that the civic gains would outweigh the negative impact of the loss of poor quality housing. A planning application for the new Irish Life Centre was lodged in March 1973, with the 12-storey tower as a centrepiece. Devane's achievement in completing a full set of design drawings for this very large and complex development in a 6-month period was quite remarkable, particularly because at the same time he and his team were preparing planning application drawings for another large scheme, AIB Bank Centre in Ballsbridge. His efforts did not go unnoticed by Irish Life, whose managing director, R.P. Willis, commended him for the vast amount of work and creative thought that had gone into its design. He recognised the effort it took to produce work of such quality, particularly without any question of special incentives, and said that Devane and his team were obviously totally committed to the best interests of the client and deserving of the highest praise. The Irish Life Centre proposal completely reconfigured the urban landscape of the northeast inner city. The tumbledown warren of laneways and dilapidated structures was swept away and replaced with homogeneous concrete paving and shiny new tower blocks, interspersed with carefully placed pieces of art, a bubbling fountain, and discreet gardens. The first phase of the development comprised a cluster of 8 blocks, and when the second phase was finally completed in 1985, the complex totalled 14 blocks arranged around 4 plazas. However, the planning process for phase 1 did not run smoothly. Devane's proposal for a 12-storey tower met considerable opposition from Dublin Corporation Planning Department. Devane firmly believed that the proportional ratio of the blocks demanded this height, and he was really not prepared to back down. However, 3 years later, after several planning permission applications and 2 appeals to An Bord Pleanála, the tower was reduced to 9 storeys, and Devane was left angry and frustrated. An Bord Pleanála decisions at that time rested with the Minister for Local Government. Devane blamed the decision on the Minister's fear of further fuelling the controversy over the height of the central bank on Dame Street, which had been halted during construction because of non-compliance with planning permission. Devane complained bitterly that the Minister's decision in this case is a deplorable one, although in the current circumstances it was predictable. Were it not for the unfortunate timing and the circumstances of the central bank affair, our information is that the appeal would have been completely successful. Devane's disappointment was exacerbated when it became clear that none of the residential accommodation in the complex was to be set aside for former local residents, and that Irish Life would exclude the local community from the leisure facilities, which included a swimming pool, squash courts, and a gym. In hindsight, none of these decisions was surprising, given the prevailing economic and political conditions of the time. Firstly, Dublin Corporation, and by association the Minister for the Environment, was at serious risk of losing control over development in the city and could not afford a second central bank type of humiliation. Secondly, it was apparent that the interests of commercial developers took precedence over the needs of ordinary citizens, particularly in terms of housing and access to amenities. And thirdly, lobby groups like An Taisce, the Living City Group, and the Irish Georgian Society held only a fragile authority to influence planning decisions. Meanwhile, during the planning battle for the 12-storey tower, building work continued apace at the Irish Life Centre, and by 1976, the complex was making its presence felt on the street. However, Devane's enthusiasm for the project continued to plummet as works progressed. Continuing repercussions of the 1973 oil crisis plagued the project as the economy started to decline. Financial pressures led to the deterioration in Devane's relationship with Michael Lucy, and other difficulties outside of either Devane or Lucy's control also increased the strain. I'll give you a couple of examples. Irish Life had embarked on the Abbey Street project determined that their development would be the first of its kind yet to be realised in Ireland by Irish men with Irish money invested. However, as the project progressed, selecting Irish suppliers and products that could meet the specification and satisfy tightening budget controls was not as simple as they had thought. In the autumn of 1975, Irish Life found themselves making the headlines regarding the glazing contract. Almost 50% of the total external wall surfaces were glazed, comprising gold solar reflective glass fixed into bronzed aluminium frames. CIS contracted a German company to undertake the window frame contract, valued at over £1 million. But because of an Irish government mandate to buy Irish, and because Irish Life was a state-owned subsidiary, an Irish contractor had to be found. In this instance, an excellent alternative was found in a man called Sean Billings, who, by substantially reducing the number of aluminium extrusions required, could do the job for far less than the Germans. He set up an on-site factory in the basement car park to build the units, ordering stock as he required it for each new batch. Although Irish Life were able to procure an Irish contractor to manufacture and install the window frames, they could not source the glazing in Ireland. The tinted glass specified was made of 2 sheets of laminated glass with gold film in between. The purpose of the tint was to exclude up to 78% of the solar heat gain. The order was placed with the Irish representative for the UK-based Pilkington Glass Company, who procured the glass in South Africa. Fortunately, press interest lay in the opulence of the gold tinting and not in the country of origin. Because of the political sensitivity around South Africa at the time, Pilkingtons and the Irish Life kept the source of the glass quiet, describing it as a UK product. And this was deemed acceptable because there was no Irish glass manufacturer capable of fulfilling the order. The awarding of the subcontract for the office furniture, on the other hand, catapulted Irish Life into an uncomfortable limelight. The £200,000 furniture contract was awarded to a British firm in October 1975. In January 1976, a series of hard-hitting newspaper articles with headlines like "Irish Life in the hot seat" and "State to probe Irish Life deal" landed Irish Life in a very serious predicament. The domestic furniture industry was suffering a recession of unparalleled severity, and many Irish office furniture companies had been awaiting their opportunity to tender for the project. To deflect from the bad publicity, Irish Life announced that the contract had been awarded to an Irish firm. However, it later emerged that the firm was merely acting as a distributor for the Irish Life's actions. Irish Life's actions led to one senator calling for the dismissal of the entire Irish Life board. It was at this time that Devane's workload began to take a significant toll on his health. During the project, he was simultaneously completing Stephen Court and managing the design and construction of AIB Bank Centre. His clients, Irish Life and Allied Irish Banks, were among the most powerful and influential companies in the world of Irish business. Their demands and their undermining of his authority brought considerable stress, and he was hospitalised several times during 1977 and 1978, and again in the early years of the 1980s. In addition, his wife's illness and death in 1977 impacted his personal well-being. It is therefore not surprising that his relationship with Irish Life floundered. Despite the challenges, however, Devane did his best to hang on to many of the Irish Life Centre's finer design elements, including the commissioning of Irish artists Oisin Kelly, Alexandra Bayshert, Desmond Kinney and John Behan to produce bespoke artworks for the complex. The 2 garden courtyards in the complex were the most splendid, privately owned but public accessible gardens in the city. However, as they had done at Stephen Court, Irish Life downgraded public access to the complex, inserting barrier controls, including a protective moat with retractable drawbridges, and installing security monitor, to the extent that the Irish Life Centre became one of the city's most infamous examples of fortress architecture, ultimately leading to the failure of the civic intentions and integration into the city that Devane had set out to achieve. In their essay, From Downturn to Diversity, Revisiting the 1970s, British architectural historians Elaine Harwood and Alan Powers assert that the passage through the decade seems like a journey from a distant land to the beginning of the present era. The Irish Life Centre's passage through that decade is exactly that. Conceived as Ireland's most ambitious urban development in the boom-time early years of the decade, it was delivered at a time of economic recession, unemployment, and escalating interest rates and political upheaval north and south of the border. It embraced new trends in open plan office design and fought off challenges of the conservation movement, specifically civic and housing preservation groups. Having been conceived prior to the first oil crisis of 1973, ecological sustainability was not high on the list of priorities. However, new technologies in relation to solar control, interior climate control, and the growing use of computers in business influenced the shape and form of its architecture. From the outset, a series of disputes damaged the reputation of Irish life and, by association, the centre's development. The controversy over the awarding of the furniture contract compounded the negativity associated with earlier rows about Northumberland Square and the height of the main block. By the time the development was complete, conflict over the demolition of Northumberland Square was largely forgotten, but the fact remained: it contributed to the decimation of the population in this fragile and damaged part of the city. The protracted planning process and public arguments over the height of the central tower validated public opinion that property development was all about profit and not about the betterment of the city. Devane's aesthetic argument that a higher tower would endow scale and harmony was completely lost in the general furore about building heights in Dublin. And finally, when the centre was completed, client-designed impediments such as the moat, the austere emptiness of the public realm, the inaccessibility of the gardens, and the gloomy atmosphere of the shopping mall all contributed to negative perceptions. Devane had intended that the main plaza, dominated by Oisin Kelly's spectacular sculpture and water pool, would be the central focus of the development. Although the main plaza acted as the main access point for the office blocks, it did not function as a focal point for the public, primarily because the cross-pedestrian routes were disrupted by stringent security measures. As a result, Dubliners failed to use the public spaces. The east-west route from Beresford Lane to Northumberland Square, which passed through the plaza, started and ended with concrete car park ramps that were neither safe nor appealing, and the route was neither a shortcut nor a pleasant alternative to Abbey Street. The north-south route through the dreary shopping mall did little to entice casual incursions. Markedly, the pedestrian routes failed to provide sufficient footfall to make them enjoyable, attractive, and safe. For those living on the complex, access to their apartments was by way of manned security doors on Talbot Street or directly from the underground car park, which was also overseen by security staff. The two garden courtyards were nonetheless a rare gem in the city, lushly planted with well-orientated seating and delightful water features with flashes of flank road right. Unfortunately, the gardens never became the civic shared amenity that Devane had intended. The balance he hoped to strike between shielding occupants from the surrounding environment, which he described as dreary and noisy with traffic and trains, and creating a microcosm of a busy city within the centre's perimeters did not materialise. Irish lives and security interventions prevented the inner, calm spaces from being enlivened by urban activity. The intimacy of the gardens was tainted by exclusivity, while at the main plaza, the lack of public seating discouraged the public from pausing and stopping despite its sunny orientation. The shopping arcade, which opened in 1979, failed to entice shoppers with its low, dark entry on Talbot Street and second dismal entrance on Northumberland Square, which was shared with the concrete car park ramp. Primarily because of the poor economic climate, Irish Life did not succeed in securing an anchor tenant for the mall, leaving it in a perilous position regarding footfall. The small retail units were let to individual shop owners on 35-year leases, but many struggled to survive, and within a few years, the mall was predominantly empty. The British architectural historians Howard and Power's assessment of the 1970s pointed to the fact that it was a violent decade. And this was certainly the case in Ireland mainly because of the troubles in the north. At the same time, the northeast inner city experienced its own period of violence, primarily due to poverty, crime and drug use. The result was an increase in burglary, theft and antisocial behaviour. It was not surprising then that the Irish Life felt it necessary to install security measures, though they had negative consequences for Devane's intended magnanimous civic gestures. In 1977, priests in the parish of Sean McDermott Street wrote to the Taoiseach about the breakdown of law and order in the area. One of the priests, Father Peter McVerry, who subsequently opened a hostel for homeless young men and became an advocate for social justice in the city's deprived communities, went so far as to write to the Irish Life chairman asking for a meeting with him and his architect Andy Devane to look at how conditions in the city centre might be improved. To answer the question of what the Irish Life Centre contributed to Dublin's urban landscape, it can be argued that it was probably Ireland's most symbolic architectural representation of the 1970s. Poet Seamus Heaney remarked of the 1970s that there was promise in the air as well as fury and anger, and his observations serve to describe the Irish Life Centre well. It was designed and constructed at a time when theories on urbanism were being tossed around, abandoned and remoulded, and when public distrust in architects had reached a zenith. Devane, who was never one to follow a dominant trend, sought to overcome the contagion of distrust by pursuing his desire to make places that nurtured community and made cities better places to live in. Bearing in mind the personal and professional hurdles he overcame during its design and realisation, the question of whether Devane succeeded at the Irish Life Centre in delivering a development that enhanced the city is perhaps subservient to what he achieved during the circumstances of its evolution. In architectural terms, the Irish Life Centre was created through the interdependent forces of mass, form and materiality, fused together to create a harmonious whole from its various parts. The shifting heights of the buildings, with their rounded corners and shapely copper roof profiles, created a soft, non-adversarial hierarchy that responded to the adjacent buildings, to each other, and to the passageways and plazas of the ground surface. The muted brindle palette of varying shades of brown and of rough concrete just opposed with smooth bronze surfaces made the Irish Life Centre very much a building of the 1970s, with echoes of brown corduroy, flared trousers, polo neck knits, and wide striped shirt collars. Since its completion, there has been little nostalgia for this aesthetic. For most Dubliners, the Irish Life Centre was a scant remnant of a brief and tumultuous 1970s heyday and came to be more closely associated with the grim recession of the 1980s. I will leave you with one last thought. You might have observed that the Irish Life Centre is once again a building site, as major development works are ongoing. What are they doing, you might ask? One thing they are doing is adding that additional floor that Devane fought so hard but failed to build in 1975. Thank you.